Microfinance CEO Working Group, the Smart Campaign, the Grameen Foundation, and Grameen Credit Agricole. And so first I'll begin with a brief presentation about the Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group and speak a little bit about each of the initiatives that participate in that working group. And then each of my colleagues will have a chance to explain a little bit about how the organizations are interacting with this topic on the subjects of social performance and client protection. And then we'll have a space at the end for your questions. And we want it to be interactive, so feel free to participate. We're going to have some question and answer period during the presentation as well as at the end. Thank you for your attention. ¿Pueden poner las láminas en español? So, over the last few years, there have been a number of crises in different financial markets in microfinance around the world, and some of these have led to negative media attention. And so for these reasons, there has been, over the last few years, a number of initiatives that have developed to help refocus the attention of microfinance on the client. And the variety of initiatives that have evolved has created some confusion among practitioners. And so this presentation is an effort to clarify who are the different initiatives that are working in this area and what is the particular role of each of them and how do they all fit together. So we want to make sure that you all come away with an understanding of how coordinated all of these organizations are, and this alignment is designed to reduce confusion and duplication of effort and make things clearer for those of you who are working in the field on this topic. So one thing before we begin, I'd like to also see a show of hands. How many of you are MFIs? So we can just see who's in the room. MFIs. Okay, how many networks do we have? We have networks, redes, gente de redes. Investors? Any investors? Inversores? Sí. Donantes, fundaciones, donors? Okay, nobody's admitting to a couple. All right. So just to get a sense of who all is here participating. Nobody raised their hand. Okay. All right. So all of these, anyway, all of these activities are focused really on how to help microfinance institutions, but each of them also do have a relationship with the other stakeholder groups. So we'll be discussing that more in detail as we progress. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is sort of get a sense of what you all already know about this topic so we can tailor our remarks to the level that would be most productive for all of you. And so I have a few questions, and we'll just do a show of hands the way we've been doing. So the first one is, do the universal standards of social performance management do not include the client protection principles? How many people believe this is true? I see a show of hands for true. Show of hands for false. Anybody thinks it's false? Okay, good. This is in fact false. About 1/3 of all of the universal standards of social performance are taken directly from the Smart Campaign's clients protection certification standards. And so that's just one example of how the initiatives are working together to streamline and coordinate efforts on responsible finance. Next one is about microfinance transparency. Microfinance transparency's tool establishes a line where interest rates should be. How many of you think this is true? False? False? Okay, some people think it's false. That's correct. It is false. Microfinance transparency offers tools that help you calculate the true cost of certain products Thanks.
That way.
The next one is about TrueLift. So it says, joining the TrueLift community of practice signifies commitment to positive and enduring change for people living in poverty. So how many of you think that's true? Good number. How many think it's false? Nobody? All right, you guys are on the right track. It is in fact true. TrueLift aims to renew a focus on the pro-poor objectives in microfinance for those institutions that do have a commitment to alleviating or reducing poverty. And the community of practice is a place where all of those organizations can come together to exchange information and ideas and grow together towards sharing and improving practices in terms of reaching the poor and making microfinance more effective at reaching the poor. So this slide shows you the logos of the institutions that began the RIF working group last year. The Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group was started in order to formalize this commitment, because over the years, all of these initiatives have been communicating and working together, but it hadn't been a formal collaboration that was more structured. And so the Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group was started to help make that possible. And over the last year, a number of other organizations have joined in, as well as the ones that you see pictured here, including the rating agencies that specialize in microfinance, as well as the Microfinance CEO Working Group and others. So this in the last year, we made a lot of advances in terms of working together to coordinate training materials and training sessions, as well as the actual content of the initiatives. And all of these initiatives are interested in having a refocusing of microfinance on client-centered practices. And also a number of these organizations are working in setting standards or norms to make it an effort at self-regulation, because sometimes in various markets there's regulation from the national level, but in countries where that doesn't happen, and also internationally, where these initiatives can help establish the standards that the sector can aspire to overall. So during this presentation, we hope to clarify for you all what it means to improve practice on responsible and inclusive finance, and how MFIs can work towards that goal. So to begin, I guess we should start with the definition, which is this: that responsible and inclusive finance is the provision of financial services in a way that targets excluded people, protects the interests of clients, and protects the mission and the sustainability of the institution. So that's our consensus definition of what responsible finance is. And here's a structure that can explain the different aspects of that. So responsible and inclusive finance fundamentally contains both client protection and social performance. And client protection is something that's applicable to all institutions operating in financial service provision, while social performance is appropriate for any institution with a double bottom line. So any institution that has a social mission and is working to achieve that social mission. So each of these financial institutions should engage in client protection, basically, no matter what their mission is. But any MFI with a double bottom line should also be working towards social performance and putting their mission into practice. So the RIF has, the Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group has also defined a pathway that can help institutions advance through their progress towards achieving all of these different standards and their social goals. And so we're going to discuss a little bit more about each of the initiatives that's listed here, as well as the pathway that's recommended for improving practice. it's something that all institutions can be working towards achieving. And that we want to, in terms of its relation to social performance, we say that client protection is the foundation. So it's the base where everyone should begin. And then social performance goes above and beyond the client protection. It's sort of built on the foundation of client protection, And how to get involved with the SMART campaign or with improving client protection, you can read their website, you can study the client protection principles, and you can also do a self-assessment using the Getting Started questionnaire. So all of those are good ways to begin, and they have a website that's full of resources in multiple languages to help organizations improve practice on the 7 principles. Next, on the client protection side is microfinance transparency. Microfinance transparency's mission is to promote the welfare of the clients through addressing the lack of transparency in microfinance product pricing. And so it's very specific to one of the client protection principles on pricing transparency. And by becoming more transparent, you would be meeting this client protection principle, and also it is likely to be mandatory in several markets. It's already mandatory, and so it's something proactive that organizations can do to show leadership in this area. And in terms of getting involved, they have a calculator that's available for free on their website. And if microfinance transparency is operating in one of your countries, you can participate in that project. But otherwise, you can use their calculator to calculate the true price in a way that will be comparable with peer institutions in your same country or within the region by entering all of the product-specific data into that calculator. So that's a way to begin working on that initiative. In terms of social performance, the Social Performance Task Force is a membership organization. There's almost 2,000 individual members and several hundred organizational members that are all committed to incorporating the universal standards into their work and working towards greater providing social benefits to the clients. So the Social Performance Task Force has recently released a suite of tools that have been a number of years in the making. The Universal Standards of Social Performance are a comprehensive manual of good practice that was created by people in the industry. Several hundred people participated in the creation of the standards. And those standards can help institutions identify their strengths and weaknesses, and it enumerates all of the strong practices that have been collected throughout the industry over time. So the suite of tools that the task force has available includes the universal standards themselves, which is 19 standards which define good practice in the areas of monitoring social goals, ensuring employee commitment to social mission, appropriate products, treating clients responsibly, treating personnel responsibly, and balancing social and financial returns. So those are the areas covered. And if you want to do an assessment of your organization against these universal standards, there's a social audit tool available that was created in collaboration with the Social Performance Task Force and Cerise. That's called the SPI4. And it's completely aligned around the universal standards. It contains all of the client protection initiatives, and their certification standards, and also has optional modules for poverty assessment using the TrueLift and PPI indicators, as well as modules on gender and the environment. So all of those indicators contain the best thinking of the leading initiatives on those topics, all in one place. And the Social Performance Task Force is working to promote the use of that tool among investors and networks and other stakeholders in order to reduce the reporting burden on MFIs by allowing them to have one tool they can use. That tool generates the reports that summarize the information, and then those reports can be shared with all the relevant stakeholders, such as the mix and your investors. So the task force also has available an implementation guide and an online resource library that contains information about how to actually implement good practice on each of its standards. And all of those resources are available for free on the website. So again, the way to begin is to read the manual, understand the universal standards, and then do a self-assessment using the SPI4 tool. Finally, the next initiative I'll describe is TrueLift. And that TrueLift wants to improve practice through its community of learning and sharing information about pro-poor initiatives. And they're building a roadmap for those institutions that really focus on poverty reduction as their goal. So how you can get involved with this initiative is to join the community of practice and complete the self-assessment. They have an assessment tool that contains their principles of pro-poor work, and those can be done either as a separate assessment or through the poverty module of the SPI4. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about this roadmap, sort of how do you get from intent and a commitment to good social performance and inclusive finance to action, actually achieving better practice. And so this is the pathway with 5 steps: learn, assess, plan, implement, and demonstrate. And for each of the tracks that we described, client protection, social performance, or poverty focus, we can talk a little bit about these steps. So the next thing, I have another true and false question for all of you. It is the universal standards of social performance are standards for social outcomes that all financial institutions should achieve. How many people think it's true? How many people think it's false? Lots and lots of people don't have an opinion. But basically this one is false because the social performance standards are for good practice in social performance management. They do not tell you what your mission should be, but they give you a set of management practices that can help you achieve your mission, whatever that mission is, as long as the institution has a social mission. And our experience has showed us that these good management practices will help you achieve that mission. So it's good to know that it doesn't specify what your mission should be. All right, in terms of learning, what you can do to learn more on client protection, you can read the client protection principles and the Microfinance Transparency's 10 steps for pricing transparency, which is a brief that's available on our website. In terms of social performance, you can read the Universal Standards Manual and the Principles for Investors in Inclusive Finance, the PIF, which defines how that is applicable to investors. For poverty focused, you can read the TrueLift Pro-Poor Principles and the Progress Out of Poverty Index. In terms of assessment for each of these initiatives, what can an institution do that's interested in evaluating where it stands on all of these efforts? For client protection, you can begin with the Getting Started questionnaire. It contains all of the indicators for certification and client protection. You can also have a SMART assessment, which can be done by accredited SMART assessors. And for microfinance transparency, you can use their pricing tool, which I mentioned earlier. For social performance, it's the SPI4 audit tool. And the mixed market also offers regional reports. For poverty focus, TrueLift offers its self-assessment, which is also available through the SPI4. And the PPI has its standards of use manual, which can help you evaluate where you are on that particular aspect. For all of the tracks, the next step is plan. We'll just keep going until I get the presentation back. The next step is plan. And in terms of an action plan, once you get the assessment, you can see where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, and you can use your own template or a template that is available with the SPI4 of how to create an action plan, basically combining your institution's strategic objectives, its budget, its mission and priorities to define where in the gaps that the assessment has identified you should begin. And you don't have to do everything at once. It's not reasonable to think that you're going to, fix everything that showed up in the evaluation in the next year, but it gives you a list of areas for improvement, and also you can prioritize those in the action plan and make a plan for how to step-by-step improve practice and head in the right direction in terms of meeting these standards that have been defined by the industry. In terms of implementation for client protection, there's a number of smart tools on the Smart Campaigns website. They have a great variety of tools that can help you improve practice on all of the client protection principles. And there, you can report pricing in terms of transparency through non-FTE's data collection tool. On the social performance side, we have the implementation guide, which is a reference guide. It's 158 pages, so everything you ever wanted to know about how to implement good social performance management should not be read cover to cover, but you can use it as a reference. If the assessment shows that you need to work on, practice 3B4, you turn to that page in the guide, and it has 2 pages on exactly how to do that. If that's something concrete, like you need to have a staff satisfaction survey, you can go to the Resource Center, and in the Resource Center, there are good examples of how to do a staff satisfaction survey available in English and Spanish. And so there's concrete tools available for free to help you take that next step, that are based on the best practice of your peers around the world who have already developed those kind of tools. In terms of property focus on implementation, there's the Community of Practice that TrueLift organizes, and the PPI resources and case studies that can give you examples of how to do good implementation in terms of managing the PPI data collection and analysis. The next one is another question for all of you. And what do you think? Every financial institution should be certified in client protection? How many think true? Okay, several. How many think false? Okay. So this one is false, just in the sense that it depends, because you should get certified only if you're ready for certification, and that's not necessarily the first step for every organization. It's achievable for most institutions, but it does take time and effort, and most organizations need to do an assessment, either a self-assessment or a smart assessment first, to identify the gaps, and then address those gaps, and then prepare for certification. But it's an important distinction to understand. So, tricky question, another trick question. And the next one is, PPI users may change or replace an indicator on the scorecard to make the survey more relevant or accurate for their particular region. How many of you think that's a good idea? Okay, good. How many of you think that's false? Very good. Okay, the questions have been very carefully constructed based on rigorous statistical analysis and should not be replaced, because together they give the information about the probability of a client falling under the poverty line. So the predictive power of the PPI requires the questions to be the same. In terms of demonstrating results and reporting, there are also a number of ways that this can happen. For client protection, there's certification, there's smart assessment, and for microfinance transparency, there's the sealed transparency that they offer for those that excel in that area. Social performance offers ratings done by the specialized microfinance rating agencies, all of whom have been very involved in the client protection and social performance initiatives, the construction of the certification indicators and the universal standards, and so have aligned their methodologies with those initiatives. There's an institutional rating, and the mix has stars for recognizing those who report the data to the mix. For poverty focus, TrueLift has its milestones. There's aspirant, emerging, achiever, and leader for those that are progressing towards good outcomes in terms of poor leadership. And there's also PPI certification, which organizations can pursue to really validate the rigor with which they're applying the tool. So those are the ways that institutions can demonstrate their results, and it's a long process. There's a lot of different aspects of it, and you don't necessarily need to get to this end goal soon, but it's something that we can all be working towards. So that's that's the overview, the presentation about all the different initiatives that are in the Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group, how they're working together. And now I'd like to provide my colleagues on the panel an opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about their initiatives and how social performance is really, or how their initiatives interact with the topics of client protection and social performance, as well as what they recommend in terms of how to get started on that topic. Okay. So before we transition to that section, maybe there are questions in the audience. We can take some questions now. I'll repeat it so that everyone can hear. Our colleague asked if there was an organization in Paris that was working on this as well. So Cerise is based in Paris, and they are a social audit firm that developed the SPI. Is that Convergence? Oh.
Convergences, what's that?
Convergence is an annual conference that is taking place in Paris, but which is a much larger view than finance or inclusive finance or microfinance. It is a conference that is uniting the different participants in social economy. So it's NGOs, funders, private companies, and the idea is particularly to unite public and private actors who are active in the world of social economy. That's taking place in 2 weeks ago, in fact, in Paris.
Thank you for that question. Do others have questions about the topics in the presentation or how any of these initiatives relate? Okay, so I'll begin by passing the microphone to my colleague, Isabelle.
Hi everyone, so my name is Isabelle. I'm the director of the SMART campaign. So what we focus on is all of the client protection issues that Cara highlighted in her presentation. I really do want to leave time for questions also, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I did want to list the 7 client protection principles, just so you all have them in your head. So the client protection framework that we orient our work around is around 7 principles that are appropriate product design and delivery, prevention of over-indebtedness, transparency, responsible pricing, fair and respectful treatment of clients, privacy of client data, and finally, mechanism for complaint resolution. So as Cara highlighted, all of our initiatives are really focused on the MFIs. They're all about providing tools, incentives, and services to MFIs to improve their practices. This is what the campaign started with and is focused on, but we realized that when we talk about client protection, this is only one component. If the end goal is that clients are protected, the microfinance institutions have a role to play, but the regulators also have a role to play in having appropriate regulation. The clients themselves, clients can be only best protected if they know their rights, but also their responsibilities. So we fully acknowledge that we are working just on one slice of what is important to reach that ultimate goal. Another limitation, should I say, or focus that the campaign started with and that will evolve with time is that we indeed started to work with the microfinance institutions. But the focus of the campaign is really to work on financial consumer protection for vulnerable populations. And so as the providers of financial services to those vulnerable populations change, for example, with the emergence of more digital financial services, then the campaign inevitably will need to take a look at our work with different lenses to make sure that clients are still adequately protected as they're being served by a wider range of organizations and through a wider mean. This panel, I think, is hopefully it's less confusing than it's been in the past. I think we all realize that it's still a lot of information, a lot of initiatives, a lot of principles, When Cara mentioned the number of pages of the guide, I saw a few eyes rolling or a little bit of intimidation, but it's really, the reason why it's long is that all the information is there so that you can have it all in one place. The idea is that all this takes time to implement, but it really, we are looking at this from the perspective that social performance and client protection should really be embedded in the operations of organizations that have a double bottom line and should not be an afterthought. So even though there's some initial work that is required, hopefully with time and as just some of these concepts are better integrated, then it should be smoother and more streamlined. Just wanted to mention a few other things. So the whole process of how do you start? If you're interested in starting for your institution, there are just a few MFIs in the audience, but even if you're looking at it from the perspective of another stakeholder that wants to work with institutions, support institutions, or influence institutions, the whole progress around starting with assessments and with basically establishing what is the baseline, what's your current performance, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and then working on those, working on the weaknesses, and then demonstrating progress. That is, so you can either do that and start with, for example, assessing across the full spectrum of client protection and beyond client protection, or you can also decide to go through the entire process for start with client protection, for example, and then add social performance. So the exact path that the institutions will take really depend on what your priorities are, what your resources are, and also what your internal, what are the opportunities internally to incorporate this work so that it's really as efficient as possible and as least costly as possible. Also want to mention, I saw a few of you take pictures. I have handouts of a lot of these slides, so feel free to come up after. And finally, I'm not sure she's going to have an opportunity to talk, but if you're interested in particularly TrueLift, we have someone in the audience, Bridget, also, who can answer your questions.
I'll just make one clarification, which is that, as Isabelle mentioned, if you decide to begin with client protection and you use the Getting Started questionnaire and fill that out, and then at some point in the future you decide you want to move on to address social performance, the SPI4 has the ability to incorporate all the data from the Getting Started questionnaire. You just click a button and it pulls all the information from the Getting Started questionnaire into the SPI4. So that's another way in which we try to integrate these tools and initiatives so that you don't have to duplicate that, or you can just use that and go on. Now I'd like to pass the word to my colleague Alex Council from the Grameen Foundation.
Thank you, and I want to first compliment all of you for being so intelligent. You figured out that you were not going to get into the room through these doors, and you had to go around and come through this one. It's no wonder that you got all the questions right on the quiz. There were a bunch of people still standing out there, kind of walking in circles, so they didn't quite make the standard. So we're glad to have you all here. I think there are basically three related issues in this conversation. I think from the Grameen Foundation perspective, there's issue of brand, products, and standards. This is fundamentally an issue of standards, but they all relate. So some years ago, it became clear that there were people doing microfinance, talking about what they're doing in microfinance, who were doing it in a wholly, or at least partially, unethical way. Think about the subprime loans in the US. And then there were others who were doing microfinance in a purely profit maximization mode, which again, as long as they're doing it ethically, there's nothing wrong. But then there were others of us doing it both ethically and also trying to create positive social change. And everyone got really confused because all three groups were using the term microfinance. So we've been struggling first and foremost to say, how do we distinguish what we're doing? And so this term responsible inclusive finance has come up. The Microfinance CEO Working Group and some others were using a slightly different term, responsible microfinance. But again, first and foremost, we're trying to reclaim that term and bring clarity to the marketplace. which has been very helpful. Now, products, obviously, in order to deliver on on this ideal of responsible microfinance, we need to develop products that don't harm people and that have a very good chance of doing good for them. And that's a continual process. And then standards are the thing that kind of undergird both good products, rolling them out, improving them, and also making that brand distinction real. And I think it's important to say that we're developing standards in our industry quite late, much later than we should have. And two other things to mention about these standards are that they need a series of tools and information platforms that make so that PPI is a tool that makes applying these standards easier. The Mix, for example, is an information platform that is an accelerator and a facilitator. And also that now that we're kind of hurrying to develop these, it's become a kind of a patchwork of standards, and it's been fragmented, which has positive and negative elements. Positive in that those organizations that felt really passionate about one aspect of the standards could just take it and run with it. It hasn't been imposed from governments or even from a group of wise men and wise women who would sit down and determine all this. But it also is a bit fragmented. But again, it would be problematic if it were done the other way. In Grameen Foundation's case, we've taken the most initiative around the Progress Out of Poverty Index, which I'll say one thing, while we don't recommend people substituting questions in the survey, we do encourage people to integrate the survey into a larger monitoring and evaluation format that can be organization specific. We call that the embedded PPI, which is in this, you'll find information on that on the website. We were also among the earliest supporters of TrueLift, and have been very involved in that. And Professor Yunus was an early backer of microfinance transparency, as was Grameen Foundation. On the other hand, the Center for Financial Inclusion took the early lead on the SMART campaign, consumer protection, client protection principles. The universal standards were really an industry-wide effort, but the Ford Foundation and the board of the Social Performance Task Force took the lead. Social ratings play a very important role, and the four specialized agencies have really done tremendous work in developing a methodology around social ratings. They're not quite unified yet, I think, but they're close. And Moody's has played a very important role among the mainstream rating agencies in advancing and developing a very robust tool. And so this whole kind of patchwork that's come in, that we've kind of rushed together, is going to be extremely important if we do it right, of making sure products are better and better and more customized, and we can reclaim the brand. Now, to say a little word about the PPI, which like TrueLift, can be easily applied outside of the microfinance and financial inclusion spaces. Really, we see it as basically three types of uses, and we try to apply these in everything that we do. Also, we encourage others to, as we try to develop this as an industry standard. And I should note that, particularly because Professor Latifi from Grameen Trust is here, the origin of the PPI, our attraction to it, was a very scientific way of doing what Grameen Bank did, which was its 10 indicators of poverty, which was really path-breaking first attempt to do this back in the late 90s. The three uses we use it for are number one, around what people used to call targeting and what we call client segmentation through a simple, rapid survey tool. Second of all is what we call stakeholder accountability. If you have a mission about getting people out of poverty, it might make sense to measure whether people are actually getting out of poverty and to do it as inexpensively as possible. Thirdly is to use the data for better decision making about products, about processes, even around promotions for employees. So I was asked to just as a final comment to talk about what are some of the challenges we face in the industry's faced. One is this fragmentation and at least the perception of overlapping tools is the confusion that relates is a real issue. It's a function of this kind of bottom-up hurried process to develop these that I think is working itself out partly through this responsible inclusive finance group. And also that there's been a API, but quite different. And that has also confused a lot of people. But I'll say that in this chaotic kind of bottom-up process, better to have a pretty good non-standard tool than no tool at all, and kind of ignore the issues that we're trying to address here. So I don't want to look at that as a glass half full. But my final comment is on the fragmentation. I think that the initiative that does the best at pulling all of these together and developing and putting in the context both of a kind of third-party certification, but also learning and improvement is TrueLift. TrueLift, I think, is the latecomer to this process. Is rather than trying to create new standards, is to aggregate the emerging best standards and put it in the context of certification and learning. And I would encourage all of you, if you're not familiar with TrueLift or you haven't checked out what it is in recent times, it used to be called the Seal of Excellence for Poverty Outreach and Transformation. Check it out. It's a really robust tool, and it's attracted anywhere from commercial banks to NGOs and everyone in between.
Thank you, Alex. And if Anne Hastings, my colleague who represents the Microfinance CEO Working Group, intends to tell us more about her mission.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you're all thoroughly confused now, but hopefully you are this much less confused than you were when you walked in the door. At least that's our goal. I am the executive director of the Microfinance CEO Working Group. At the same time, in my responsibility in that position, I'm also on the steering committee of the SMART campaign. I'm on the board of the Social Performance Task Force, and I'm also on the steering committee of TrueLift. So I've been able to get a very broad overview and be really involved in the development of all of these standards and different cuts at what makes a microfinance institution be able to produce the outcomes it's trying to reach. In addition, I have 17 years of experience as a practitioner of microfinance, and so that's given me the perspective of both, I think, the client and the MFI on how the heck do we deal with all of these. But as the director of the Microfinance CEO Working Group, I have to tell you, it's really an amazing thing. We have 8 CEOs of major global networks of MFIs that have come together since 2011 to collaborate. And there's, in my opinion, far too little collaboration in our industry. RIF is a good example, the Responsible Inclusive Finance, but the CEO Working Group has taken everything that's come out of all of this standard setting and decided how are we going to approach this. So the networks, you might be interested, are Axiom, FINCA, Freedom from Hunger, Grameen Foundation, Opportunity International, ProMu Hair, Vision Fund International, and Women's World Banking. Combined, we have 223 microfinance institutions in 65 countries, serving 45 million clients. So while we don't represent the majority of the sector by any means, we represent a pretty good slice of it, approximately a quarter of the industry. Now, these CEOs got together because they were worried about the reputation of microfinance and the criticisms that were coming at it. And they decided that when they talked and started to share what was important to them and what their challenges were, they realized that their vision for the industry, despite their own competitiveness, their vision for the industry was very, very similar. So they kept on meeting, and since 2011, they've been meeting face-to-face once a quarter, and they meet monthly by conference call. I think this is incredible that this is happening. And they have decided, in collaboration, that they want to see all 223 of their microfinance institutions making progress along this pathway to responsible microfinance. And they have what they call the Triple Crown, which is smart campaign client protection, pricing transparency, and the universal standards for social performance management. So I am tracking all 223 of those institutions so that I can tell you how many are certified for client protection, how many have had a social rating, how many have moved from point X to point Y in this pathway. And of the 22 institutions that have been certified, or 23 as of today, 15 of them are members of one of these 8 networks, one or more of these 8 networks. So we're about collaboration, we're about bringing the industry together in implementing responsible, inclusive finance. And I look forward to any questions that you might have about how we're doing. We're not doing as well as we need to do, but we are definitely making progress. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. And now I'd like to invite my colleague Jürgen of Grameen Credit Agricole to give his remarks.
Okay, yeah, Jürgen, I am head of investments at Grameen Credit Agricole Foundation. You might wonder what is the relationship. We are Grameen Foundation, Grameen Credit Agricole Foundation. So it means we are initiatives, funders of microfinance institutions, to summarize it briefly. Grameen Credit Agricole Foundation was set up in 2007 by one of the French leading banks, Credit Agricole Group, with the mission to support and to fund microfinance institutions worldwide. As a foundation and with a specific mission, of course, with Grameen in our partnership, and Professor Yunus, who is on the board of our foundation, we are focusing on the support of socially oriented microfinance institutions. When we set up the foundation, and I started that foundation together with my colleagues and our managing director, it was obvious we decided to implement a full financial analysis. But on the other hand, we realized that we cannot, as a double bottom line institution, we cannot, let's say, limit ourselves on an in-depth financial analysis and then use 3 or 4 social indicators and call that the double bottom line approach. 8 years ago, we then started to look and see what was available in the market. And we realized that most of our co-funders of microfinance funds, because of the absence of a language, of a tool for social performance evaluation, had developed their own in-house methodology and tools. We said we cannot do the same and add yet another tool to that. By looking around what was available in the market, there was that initiative that we spoke before, that tool developed by Cerise in France, which was already widely used across the microfinance world, which was a social performance assessment tool. By looking at that with our partner MFIs, what we liked about that was it was a very autodidactive, a very self-explanatory process and methodology. By reading is great. We all learned what social performance really includes. It's not just percentage of women or percentage of farmers or average norm, it's much more. It's my mission, it's the adaptation of my products, it's the respect of the clients, it's the respect of my own employees. So that tool gave a broad explanation of what social performance includes. So we adapted that. And we have been working with SPI now for 7 years, and all of our 30 MFI partners have been assessed to that. One of the very important aspects by deciding on using a tool for our social performance assessment was that it also had value for our partners. That was fundamental. We didn't want something that just serves to report to us. It needed to make sense for our partners. And as I said, the way it was structured, that was very much the case. We also used it in a very, let's say, informal way. SPI is available free on internet, and it allowed an institution to do a self-assessment and see where it stands and get a picture at day zero. There's no judgment, it's simply to say, where do I stand as of today? That's what I need in order to see any future improvement, in order to see my weaknesses and my strength. That's how we started. Yet, we were frustrated because there were so many different initiatives, and as a funder and as a fund, we of course are very happy, and I'm very much involved also as a member together with Anne, as a member of the SPTF. We were very happy about the fact that in a self-regulatory way, this entire industry got together and said, okay, now after, let's say, 10 years of practicing, of many of us developing our own approaches and methodologies, let's get all of that effort together and create a standard. A standard is fundamental because it's a language that we have to talk to each other. So is it perfect? It might not be perfect, but it is what the industry today has available as a tool, as a common language, and as a way to communicate and understand what are we talking about when we mention that sometimes a little bit abstract topic of social performance evaluation. Yes, as Cara has explained very well, it is a global structure of the different initiatives, and what is really, from a practitioner and from an investor point of view, what is really interesting, that it structures what is fundamental to all of us. Client protection is something that any financial industry, any company as a matter of fact should need. So the fact of fully including the client protection principles in smart campaign is a prerequisite because that is something that we all need. And it covers all the other aspects of social performance management. Now, not all organizations have the same objectives. So the interesting thing of this universal standards today, as we said, from us as an investor, it allows that option to include specific angles, PPI, TrueLift, etc. If I have that focus, if I have a focus on rural development, if I have a focus on poor, on poverty, depending on, as an MFI, what my objectives and what my mission are, I now have a set of tools available that allow me to, first of all, assess myself, see my areas of weaknesses and strengths and work on them, communicate to my investors, communicate to the market, compare myself to others, and see where I stand. And so as that, we of course are very much supporting that, and we're very happy that we are moving into a better coordination and a better understanding of the area of social performance management. I think that's it. I think it's nice, it's good to have questions from your side, and we're happy to go a little bit deeper into aspects that you would like to know more about. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jürgen. So now I'd like to open it up to questions. If anyone in the audience has questions for any of the speakers or myself, we'd be happy to take questions at this time.
thanks for that really good presentation. I am actually a little less confused than I was when I came into the room. My name is Marcia Metcalf, and I'm from Freedom from Hunger. And my question has to do with resources, because even though we have obviously come a long way in terms of the kinds of tools that we have and the simplicity of use, I imagine to a lot of practitioners it's still kind of daunting. And that one of the questions that they might have is, what is this going to take for me to get started? What kind of resources? You know, I've got lots of stuff going on. I'm going to have to make some decisions. And I know the honest answer to that is that it depends on where they're already at. But I think we need a little bit more than that. So I was wondering if you all could provide some guidance in terms of talking to practitioners about what would it take for someone who wants to do this in terms of staff and resources.
Thank you for that question. Just on the topic of social performance, I would say that one of the things that Cerise has really promoted in terms of their SPI tool is that it's free. It's available free for download from their website. They have a wiki page that contains all the information about that tool, webinars and reference materials about how to use it. And so at that level, the only thing that's required is staff time in terms of the input. And we did a beta testing process with the SPI4 this spring, where 38 institutions from all over the world beta tested the SPI4, which is quite extensive. And they found that it took on average about 3 days of time for someone to complete all of the questions, because it requires consultation with colleagues in all different areas of the organization. So that time can be spread out over the course of a couple weeks or a month, but it's about 24 hours of time for a staff person. So at the very most initial level in the realm of social performance, that's the level of investment that would be required for the institution. Obviously, they could choose to invest more if they have an accompanied assessment or something else. Once they start implementing improvements, that can require a budget. But the assessment can be quite economical. I'm sure my colleagues all have different things to say on this topic as well.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I think a lot of times we want to say, well, it costs $4,000 to get PPI certified, or it costs $10,000 to have a social rating, or one of the other to be certified. It might be a little more. But the reality is the amount of time it takes the institution to make change. And I'm speaking now as a practitioner. When I was the CEO of a microfinance institution in Haiti, we started implementing these as they came along. But you need to set up task forces within your institution around particular areas that draw from the field. And if you're really spread out a lot, it can be very time consuming to bring people in or to go out where they are. It is so important to do it, though, that you really have no choice. So the idea is to set your priorities. That's number one. Set your priorities. Do a self-assessment, as we said, and figure out what your baseline is. Figure out where your weaknesses are, and then set some priorities. But you should expect that when it's all said and done, you will have spent tens of thousands of dollars. It's not something you can do for $10,000 to get all the way through all of it. That's my own personal opinion. With the CEO working group, we are attempting to find funding to help institutions to go that extra mile. It's critically important that the MFI participates by paying a significant share, and that we don't just hand it over to them. But ultimately, it does involve usually hiring assessors from outside your organization, or if you're part of a major network, you may have assessors that you've trained in-house, and that can be very helpful. And you have to ultimately do the rating agencies. For instance, if you want to be certified in client protection or if you want to demonstrate where you are with the universal standards. So all of these things take time, they take money, and I think a very important message is you can't rush it. I felt as a practitioner, oh my God, what if we find instances where we have branches that are not protecting their clients appropriately? What are we going to do? And you just have to take them one by one and get the corrections made. And it's important to make the correction throughout the institution before you move on to the next initiative that someone is introducing you to. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I hope it is.
Comment on that briefly, this is an essential topic. I think has been, we're not thinking about it correctly generally in our field. To implement these things, you generally have to purchase no new technology, no new technology platforms. You need to hire any new staff, and the cost of getting the rating, which is the culmination of it, is for most organizations a tiny fraction of their annual budget. Now, one of the things to put this to a test, when the universal standards came out in June of 2012, the Microfinance CEO working group tasked the leaders to pilot it, beta test it, I think we called it, with 16 organizations. And we felt that once you actually got going in the process, not only was it as difficult as people thought, but also it really contributed to solving other problems, nagging problems in those organizations as a byproduct, some of them which saved time and resources. And so if I just could frame it, maybe reframe this question of cost, and starting any new habit or using any new framework does take time, there's no question about it. But basically, if you're an MFI, you're continually looking to refine products, to figure out how to reward your employees, how to measure your success, how to monitor your success and your performance, and how to have a structured dialogue with your clients and potential clients. You're already doing that. What these tools are generally doing is allowing you to do that within a framework that draws from the collective wisdom of hundreds of organizations over what is together hundreds of years of experience. So again, you're already doing that, but why reinvent the wheel? Why do that in isolation? Why not do it with reference to standards that are painstakingly put into place based on what people learn doing those same things over a long period of time in multiple contexts?
Yeah, just wanted to add, I don't want to make anybody afraid with those type of numbers, because I would say the answer goes from zero, because at the beginning it's a self-assessment. You can go and you can both of those tools, and the universal standards are simply something you can download and evaluate your own organization for free by just taking the time to go through the questions. At the rating and the assessment phases are the latest phases after working. I think I have explained that very well. The standards come with implementation guides. Once you see the weaknesses in your organization, you can work on them. Then you want to go to the assessments and the rating. So it starts from just the time, and Alex mentioned it very well, the assessment of your own organization. And by looking at those fundamental social questions, they are fundamental to our industry. We improve almost exponentially the financial stability, because they make sure that we remain focused to what our mission and what our industry is, if our products are adapted, etc. All those questions were mentioned.
Other questions?
Okay, as an example, I'd like to take a look at over-indebtedness, an issue that was one of the problems in Andhra Pradesh. How do these standards, and which of these standards help identify and move away from or avoid client over-indebtedness?
So I'll give you an example. So over-indebtedness would fit in this framework under client protection as one of the main pillars of client protection. And I think one important thing to start with is to say that it's not about, and we're not saying that we're going to be able to completely avoid over-indebtedness. What we're looking at is what every institution can do that is in its power, that can try to prevent as much as possible over-indebtedness from happening, taking into consideration the fact that the context is such that sometimes it's very difficult indeed. So to give you an example of some of the standards are around giving loans after having done an adequate analysis of the capacity to repay. So not making loans that are solely based on guarantees, but going through that process of doing the individual analysis of capacity to repay. Then in the context where there are credit bureaus, checking the credit bureau, reporting to the credit bureau, so really taking that seriously and playing a role contributing to having information that will enable to reduce the risk of over-indebtedness. We realize that in many countries that's not the case. There are no credit bureaus, or in some cases also there are credit bureaus, but they're not yet effective because some of the major organizations in the country are not reporting to them. So you just need to have one or two major organizations that are not, and in addition to the fact that many of the clients are also accessing financial services from other sources that are not reporting to the credit bureau. So what we look for is the extent to which, again, what's in the control of organizations in such a context is sharing information amongst themselves, sometimes through a national association. So there are some informal mechanisms that are in place. So that's one area that is looked at. Another area is around incentives. So what we saw in Bangladesh, for example, was a lot around push for growth and quantity over quality. So one thing that we will look at in the standards and in the process of evaluating whether the organization is doing the best it can to reduce it is whether the incentives are balanced, so that it's not just about growth, but it's also about quality. And when we look at these types of issues, it's at different levels. It's at the level of policies. We want to make sure that the policies are in place. And the reason why we think that policies are important, not just results, is that organizations grow very quickly, people change, there are high turnover, so we want to make sure that the results that we're seeing are not incidental and that they have a better chance of continuing regardless of who is in the organization. But then we also look at whether the policies are adequately implemented. So it's great to have great policies, but is it actually taking place? Are the loan officers trained to do the adequate analysis of capacity to repay, etc.? So it's at different levels. Thank you.
First of all, on the issue of Andhra Pradesh, the issue of over-indebtedness there has been anywhere between exaggerated and grossly exaggerated. There's actually no data, right? There are a few examples and anecdotes. It was basically Andhra Pradesh was a political move by the local government to put private microfinance out of business to make things easier for public sector microfinance. And so that's what I just want to. That's my perspective on it. However, it does come back to this. The MFIs are being vilified, in part unjustifiably, or certainly without any rigorous study or data, by not agreeing to standards for client protection and then having a third-party way of certifying that they met those standards. They left themselves open to that attack and that vilification. So if you imagine AP, where all the major players have been certified that they've been adhering to the client protection principles in 2010, that whole situation might have unfolded very differently. And so I think that I think there's the issue of are you doing the right things, but also do you have a case to tell to regulators, to the public, to the media that makes sense that these accusations, if they are baseless or exaggerated, can be dismissed, and that's I think where we fell down.
And one last question.
really happy about the presentations that you have made. But I do understand that the MFIs do not operate in a vacuum. And because of that, I believe you relate with others, and I'm more concerned with the government, the relevant government structures. I'm saying this because in most countries, I think these are the policy holders, and they might have their own directions. And by doing so, in some cases, they might pose as barriers to progression of the MFI's operations. How do you relate with them? That's my question. Thank you.
Maybe I can give an example from the client protection side. So that's what I was trying to explain when I started to talk about the focus of the campaign is indeed on market conduct, self-regulation, improving the practices of the practitioners. But you make a very good point in that you could have an industry where the practitioners are doing everything, you're doing everything that needs to be done, you have great practices, but the regulation is inadequate, is not incentivizing the behavior of other organizations that maybe don't want to play by those rules, and where the clients in the end are as much as risk because they do bank with many multiple organizations. And so it is important indeed, everyone has a role to play. From the client protection perspective, what we are finding is that we're increasingly in communication with regulators. We find that in many countries, the regulators are either putting in place developing client protection regulation or updating their current client protection regulation. And we have been, it hasn't been a focus of us to date, so that's just to state that, but we have been reviewing some of those recommended changes to client protection regulation, and in this process it's really interesting to see cases where it's not aligned, and the importance indeed of it being aligned. Because if we're not giving the same message, and one example could be around transparency, for example. In transparency, we encourage a certain level of transparency. We tell MFIs, this is what is good practices, this is what you should be doing, but if truth in lending laws are different, we completely realize that if an organization is in a situation where their choice is being legal or meeting the client protection standards, well, that's a tough position to be in. So, and there's no reason for that also, because the ultimate goal is, again, really being focused on the client. So I think it is important for the various stakeholders to talk to each other and to have a message that is coherent. And on client protection, we are increasingly doing this directly from the campaign.
Maybe I can just ask, within the Social Performance Task Force, there is a special working group for work with regulators. And the very interesting process, in my eyes, that we have seen is that a certain number of central banks, by the fact that today there is a market standard that evaluates social performance questions, when they are in the process of either drafting or reviewing microfinance regulations, now they have something to refer to source additional supervisory issues that they want to include. So that is an issue that is very important, because we all work in a regulatory environment. But I find it very interesting, and we had a concrete example of Central Bank of Jordan, for example. But there are other central banks and regulators that now that there is a set of standards available, have included that and are making that part of their regulatory or of their supervisory activities. So I think that's also a good step. The industry getting together and harmonizing and streamlining our approach.
One of the initial products of the Social Performance Working Group on Regulators is a guide directed at networks on how to talk to your regulators, because it is something that our members are increasingly asking us for guidance on, and so we started working this year on how to help people do that more effectively. But I think, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the time for this session. I have two housekeeping sort of announcements that they've asked me to make. One is to read the commitments that the organizations on this panel have made to the Microcredit Summit campaign, and the other is a set of announcements about the timing of the upcoming activities. So the first one is about the commitments. Well, I'll just read the one about the timing first. So it says, experience Yucatan's culture with regional live music performance here at the summit as we bring our first day together to a close, starting now in the exhibit hall. Our welcome reception will take place, and afterwards, it will last until 8:30. Afterwards, there will be complimentary shuttle service available to you from the conference center to the selected hotels immediately after the reception ends at 8:30, and that service will continue tomorrow morning from 6:30 to 8:30 from those hotels back to this venue. Also, you can find the Microcredit Summit campaign information on Facebook, Twitter, and Eversnap. So you can find more information on in your program as well.
Okay, so this is the exciting, this is not housekeeping, Cara. I have to, reading the commitments is hardly housekeeping. So, the Microfinance CEO Working Group made a commitment in 2013 with key highlights including a focus on Smart Campaign certification among all member networks, to be on a pathway towards certification by the end of 2014, as well as a focus on pricing transparency. Secondly, contributing to a shared learning process by making available research on outcomes with each other in the networks as well as with the industry at large. And particularly related to today's session, the working group also is motivating its members to sign the Global Appeal for Responsible Microfinance, which, by the way, came out of Convergences in Paris, as an outward symbol of their commitment to the principles embodied. Also, we are getting, by the end of September, we'll have our new commitments for this coming year. Thank you.
I'm going to try to talk that enthusiasm. It's going to be difficult. So the commitments from the Center for Financial Inclusion, where the Smart Campaign is housed, are first, we commit to bringing greater attention to the issue of aging and financial services, recognizing that aging is an increasingly important issue in the developing world. And second, we renew our commitment originated in 2013 to further support the inclusion of those with disabilities by organizations in India and countries within the region. And there are a couple sessions here at the Microcredit Summit on those two topics, so I encourage you to look for them and go participate.
Thank you. By the way, Anne was very complimentary about our CEO working group that I co-chair with Marion Iskandarian, but until she came along, it was at least 50% group therapy, and then the standards and industry building work was kind of a little bit of an afterthought. But once she came in and started cracking the whip, things got really interesting. And so if you ever want to have any real action on anything, this is someone you might want to engage. In any case, the summit process around commitments, I think, is terrific. I'm really happy to be part of it. And our commitments was in 2014 to put out a global use report of the PPI, outlining known users of PPI to date and broaden the understanding of the types of organizations using it and how they were using it. Published by the end of 2014, at least one case study investigating the benefits, challenges, and outcomes seen by organizations. We just put out a report on outcomes tracking for multiple years in the Philippines, which I think is partially meeting that commitment. And thirdly, with support from DFID in India, we're going to be releasing 4 poverty outreach reports. This goes to the segmentation issue I talked about earlier. And we're on course in 4 states in India. And we're on course to, and this will be data to gather using the PPI from Indian practitioners. And we're on course to having that by the end of the year as well.
I'll close with the task force commitments, which had a commitment in both 2013 and now again in 2014 that includes the Social Performance Task Force commits to helping financial institutions use the Universal Standards and Social Performance Management Implementation Guide to begin to really implement improvements on their social goals. SPTF commits to continuing to work with Cerise to have at least 100 microfinance institutions use the SPI4 social audit tool. SPTF commits to continue working with the Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group during 2014 and 2015 to better facilitate institutions reaching their social goals. And SPTF commits to having at least 12 full-day trainings emphasizing the Responsible and Inclusive Finance Working Group's initiatives throughout this coming year. So that's our commitments. Thank you all of you for coming and for your time and your attention.
Don't forget the handouts if you want right here. In Spanish.